behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, a seismic shift has just occurred that nobody saw coming. King Charles III, the man who waited 70 years to wear the crown, has just made a declaration so shocking that it sent tremors through every corridor of the British monarchy. In a move that has left royal insiders speechless and Camilla reportedly devastated. The king has publicly acknowledged what many have whispered for years, but nobody dared say out loud. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, is his true heir. Not in terms of the throne, of course, because that belongs to William. But in every other way that matters to the future of the Windsor dynasty, Charles has chosen Kate over his own wife, the woman he fought for, the woman he defended against the entire world, the woman he waited decades to marry, has just been passed over for a commoner who married into the family barely more than a decade ago. This isn't just palace gossip or tabloid speculation anymore. This is a calculated, deliberate, and very public repositioning of the royal hierarchy, and the implications are absolutely staggering. Let me take you back to understand just how monumental this moment truly is. When Charles finally ascended the throne in September 2022, following the death of his beloved mother, Queen Elizabeth II, many wondered what kind of king he would be. Would he be the modernizer he promised to be during his decades as Prince of Wales? Would he slim down the monarchy, as he always insisted he would? Would he finally step out from the shadow of his iconic mother and forge his own path? But perhaps the biggest question on everyone's mind was this. What role would Camilla play? After all, this was a woman who had caused the greatest scandal the royal family had seen in generations. This was the woman blamed for the destruction of Charles's fairy tale marriage to Princess Diana. This was the woman the British public spent years, even decades, refusing to accept. When Charles and Camilla finally married in 2005, it was with the understanding that she would never be called queen. The palace announced she would be known as Princess Consort when Charles became king, a compromise designed to appease a public still mourning Diana and still harboring deep resentment toward the woman they saw as the other woman. But then something shifted. In February 2022, as Queen Elizabeth approached her Platinum Jubilee and clearly understood her time was limited, she made a stunning announcement. It was her sincere wish. She declared that when Charles became king, Camilla would be known as Queen Consort. This was huge. This was the queen herself, the most respected monarch in modern history, giving her blessing and her endorsement to the woman millions had refused to accept. It was seen as Elizabeth's final gift to her son, clearing the path for Camilla to stand beside Charles with the full dignity and recognition of her position. When Charles became king just months later, Camilla duly became Queen Consort, and at the coronation in May 2023, she was crowned right alongside her husband. It seemed that Camilla had finally, after decades of controversy and criticism, secured her place at the very pinnacle of British society. She had won, or so everyone thought, because what's happened in recent months tells a very different story. If you've been paying attention to the carefully choreographed appearances, the strategic photo opportunities, the calculated speeches and public statements coming from the palace, you'll have noticed something remarkable. Catherine is everywhere, not just present, but centered, not just visible, but elevated, not just supporting, but leading. While Camilla fades increasingly into background, Kate has emerged as the undisputed star of the royal family, the face the palace wants the world to see, the figure around whom the entire future of the monarchy is being constructed. And this isn't happening by accident. This is Charles's doing. This is his choice. This is his vision for what the House of Windsor needs to survive and thrive in the 21st century. Consider the evidence that's been mounting for months now. When Catherine announced her cancer diagnosis earlier this year in that incredibly brave and vulnerable video message, it was Charles who broke protocol to issue an immediate personal statement of support. Not through a spokesman, not through official channels, but in his own voice, expressing his pride in her courage and his personal closeness to his beloved daughter-in-law. The language was striking. Beloved daughter-in-law. Not just Kate, not just the Princess of Wales, but beloved, a word that carries enormous weight when spoken by a king. It was a public declaration of affection, certainly, but it was also a signal. This woman matters to me. This woman is family to me. This woman is essential to everything I'm trying to build. And then look at how the palace handled Catherine's recovery and gradual return to public life. Every update was treated with the gravity of a state announcement. Every appearance was given maximum publicity and prominence. When Kate made her first tentative return to public duties, attending Trooping the Color and later Wimbledon, the media coverage was orchestrated with military precision. She wasn't just attending events. She was being positioned as the emotional heart of the monarchy, the figure the public most wanted to see, the royal who best embodied the values of dignity, grace, resilience, and relatability that modern monarchy requires. Contrast this with how Camilla has been handled during the same period. Yes, she's carried out her duties. Yes, she's made her appearances. But there's been a noticeable lack of fanfare, a distinct absence of the kind of strategic promotion that Kate receives. Camilla attends a literary event, and it gets a brief mention. Kate attends anything, and it's front-page news with photo spreads and in-depth analysis. This is a media bias. This is palace communication strategy. This is what happens when the palace wants to build someone up, and equally when they're content to let someone else fade into the furniture. Then there are the private briefings to royal correspondents, those off-the-record conversations that shape the narrative without fingerprints. Multiple well-connected journalists have reported the same thing. Charles sees Kate as absolutely essential to the monarchy's future. He understands that she connects with the public in a way that nobody else in the family does, including himself. He recognizes that her grace during her health crisis has elevated her to a status that transcends normal royal celebrity. She's become a genuine role model, a figure of sympathy and admiration, someone the British public has taken into their hearts in a way that happens perhaps once in a generation. Diana had it. Elizabeth had it in her younger years. And now Catherine has it. Charles knows this, and he knows it's infinitely precious and absolutely cannot be squandered. But it goes deeper than just public relations. Charles is making substantive changes to how the monarchy operates, and Kate is at the center of every major decision. When Charles talks about his slimmed-down monarchy vision, the names that always appear in that inner circle are predictable. Himself, obviously, and William as heir. But then Kate is always included in that core group, and sometimes gets mentioned because of her work ethic. But Camilla, her presence in these future plans, is notable mainly for how ambiguous it is. She's not excluded, exactly, but she's not centered either. She's there, but she's not essential. She's a Queen Consort, but she's not the queen the monarchy is being built around. This distinction matters enormously in the hierarchy-obsessed world of the British royal family. For Camilla, who spent decades being treated as an outsider, who endured years of public hostility and media mockery, who finally achieved acceptance and a crown that once seemed impossible, this subtle but unmistakable sidelining must feel like a devastating betrayal. She stood by Charles through everything. She weathered storms that would have destroyed most people. She was patient when the world told her to disappear. She was dignified when she had every right to defend herself. And now, at the moment of her greatest triumph, when she should be reigning alongside her husband as a full and equal partner, she is being positioned as secondary to a woman who married into the family years after she did. And make no mistake, Camilla knows exactly what's happening. You don't survive decades in the royal spotlight without developing extremely sharp political instincts. She can read the room. She can see which way the wind is blowing. She knows that when Charles praises Kate publicly, when he ensures Kate gets a prime positioning at events, when he structures the future of the monarchy around William and Catherine's family while leaving her own role vague and undefined, he's making a choice. He's choosing the daughter-in-law over the wife. He's choosing the future over the past. He's choosing the princess the public adores over the queen the public merely tolerates. Royal insiders say the tension has been building for months. There have been private conversations, some of them reportedly quite heated, about roles and responsibilities and recognition. Camilla, according to sources close to the family, feels that after everything she sacrificed and endured, she deserves to be treated as a full and equal partner in Charles's reign. She believes that Queen Elizabeth's blessing and her coronation alongside Charles entitle her to a position of genuine authority and prominence. She thinks that constantly being upstaged by Kate, lovely as Kate is, undermines her own position and sends a message that she's somehow less valuable, less important, less central to the monarchy's mission. And on one level, she's absolutely right. It is painful to be overshadowed. It is humiliating to be treated as less important than someone who ranks below you in the formal hierarchy. Camilla is queen, Kate is Princess of Wales. In the rigid structure of royal precedence, Camilla outranks Kate in every formal sense. And yet, in the way that actually matters, in the court of public opinion and the strategic vision of the king himself, Kate has decisively won. She is the one the cameras want to photograph. She is the one the public wants to see. She is the one the palace chooses to highlight. She is the one Charles describes with genuine warmth and affection. She is, in every meaningful sense, the first lady of the royal family, regardless of what the official titles say. This dynamic became impossible to ignore during recent major events. At the Remembrance Day ceremonies, one of the most important dates on the royal calendar, the positioning of the family was extraordinarily telling. Catherine was placed in a position of maximum visibility. Her presence emphasized, her role highlighted. Camilla was there, certainly, but not with the prominence you'd expect for a Queen Consort. At the state opening of Parliament, it was Kate's fashion choices and demeanor that dominated coverage, not Camilla's. At Trooping the Color, the balcony moment that everyone remembers featured Kate with her children, the next generation royals, while Camilla stood somewhat awkwardly to the side. These placements aren't accidental. At royal events, every inch of space, every angle for photographers, every moment of visibility is calculated with obsessive precision. If Kate is centered and Camilla is peripheral, that's because someone decided it should be that way. And that someone is Charles. Understanding why Charles has made this choice requires understanding the existential crisis facing the British monarchy. This is an institution that has survived for over 1,000 years by adapting to changing circumstances, by evolving to remain relevant, by understanding that the magic of monarchy depends on public consent and affection. Right now, that consent is more fragile than it's been in generations. Polling shows declining support for the monarchy, especially among younger people. The scandal surrounding Prince Andrew cast a long shadow. Harry and Meghan's departure and subsequent public criticisms wounded the family's reputation. The cost of the monarchy during a cost-of-living crisis generates resentment. The very idea of hereditary privilege feels increasingly out of step with modern values of meritocracy and equality. Charles understands all of this with painful clarity. Unlike his mother, who reigned during Britain's post-war consensus and could rely on deference and respect as her birthright, Charles is a king who must actively earn his legitimacy. He must prove that the monarchy still serves a purpose, still adds value, still deserves the public support and public funding it receives. And he knows with absolute certainty that the way to do this is not through Camilla. The public's acceptance of Camilla is grudging at best. She's tolerated rather than celebrated. She's acknowledged rather than loved. She represents the past, the scandal, the mess, the reminder of Diana's death, and the family's dysfunction. Building the monarchy around Camilla would be building on sand. Catherine, by contrast, is the firm foundation Charles needs. She polls better than any royal, except perhaps the late Queen Elizabeth herself. She's seen as hardworking, dignified, devoted to her family, and genuinely caring about the causes she champions. She's relatable because she came from a middle-class background, yet she's adapted perfectly to royal life. She's glamorous enough to generate interest, but not so remote that she seems alien. She's made no major mistakes, caused no scandals, and handled the intense pressure of her position with remarkable grace. Most importantly, she's the mother of the future king, and in her children, especially Prince George, the public sees the monarchy's continuity and future. When Charles looks at Catherine, he sees something invaluable: hope. He sees someone who can help him accomplish what he desperately wants to achieve during his reign, which is stabilizing the monarchy and passing it on to William in better condition than he received it. He sees someone who can help bridge the gap between the institution's ancient traditions and modern expectations. He sees someone who can make the monarchy feel relevant, necessary, even inspiring to a public that might otherwise decide it a relic that's outlived its usefulness. When Charles looks at Camilla, he sees something very different. He sees his great love, certainly. He sees his trusted companion and confidant. He sees someone who supported him through his darkest years. But he also sees the baggage, the controversy, the fact that a significant portion of the British public will never fully accept her because of how their relationship began. He sees someone who, through no fault of her own at this point, cannot be the face of a forward-looking monarchy. She can play a supporting role, absolutely. She can carry out her duties with professionalism and dedication, but she cannot be the star. She cannot be the figure around whom the future is built. So Charles has made his choice, and he's made it publicly in ways that leave no room for misinterpretation. During his Commonwealth Day speech, Charles made specific mention of William and Catherine's work, praising their dedication and emphasizing their importance to the family's mission. The language was effusive and clearly heartfelt. When he mentioned Camilla, it was perfunctory, a dutiful acknowledgement of her presence, but without the warmth and enthusiasm he showed when discussing Kate. Body language experts noted that Charles visibly brightens when Kate enters a room. His entire demeanor changes. He smiles more readily. He seems more relaxed and genuinely happy. With Camilla, he's affectionate certainly, but there's a difference between spousal affection and the kind of genuine admiration and pride that he shows toward Catherine. Then there was the matter of royal patronages, those charitable organizations and institutions that carry the prestige of royal association. When high-profile patronages became available or needed reassignment, several that might logically have gone to the Queen Consort were instead given to Catherine. This was a clear signal about who the palace sees as a more valuable royal brand, the person whose association will bring more benefit to the organization and more credit to the monarchy. Camilla's patronages tend to be worthy but lower profile, focus on literacy and domestic violence issues. Kate's patronages are broader, more visible, more connected to issues that dominate public consciousness, early childhood development, mental health, and addiction. The palace even restructured how royal tours are planned and executed. When Charles and Camilla travel abroad on official state visits, they receive appropriate coverage and protocol. But when William and Catherine travel, even on less formal tours, the palace communications team goes into overdrive. The advance work is more extensive. The media briefings are more detailed. The photo opportunities are more carefully staged. The message is clear. These are the royals we're investing in. These are the faces we want the world to associate with British monarchy. Charles and Camilla are today's monarchy. William and Catherine are the future. And increasingly, Charles is making clear that he sees himself as a transitional figure whose job is to ensure that future is as secure and promising as possible. This isn't necessarily a reflection of Charles's feelings toward Camilla on a personal level. By all accounts, their marriage is solid, their partnership genuine. Charles fought for decades to be with Camilla, defying public opinion and even his mother's initial reluctance. That history doesn't simply evaporate. But Charles is also a man who has waited his entire life to be king. He understands that he may have only a decade or perhaps two to make his mark, to shape his legacy, to prove that his reign matters. He cannot afford to indulge in sentimentality or let personal loyalty cloud his strategic judgment. He must make the hard decisions that give the monarchy its best chance of survival. And right now, that means elevating Catherine, even if it comes at Camilla's expense. For Catherine herself, this situation is delicate and potentially uncomfortable. By all accounts, Kate goes out of her way to be respectful toward Camilla, acknowledging her position, and avoiding anything that might seem like competition. Kate is too smart and too schooled in royal protocol to openly compete with the Queen Consort, but she also understands what's happening. She knows that Charles favors her, that the palace machinery is working to make her the dominant female figure in the royal family, that her brand of royalty is what the institution needs right now. She didn't ask for the situation, but she's professional enough to recognize the opportunity and responsibility it represents. William, too, finds himself in an interesting position. On the one hand, seeing his wife elevated and celebrated must be gratifying. William knows Kate's worth, knows how hard she works, knows the strength of character it took to handle her recent health crisis with such dignity. He must feel proud and protective seeing her recognized as essential to the monarchy's future. On the other hand, this situation potentially puts strain on his father's marriage, and William has always been respectful, even affectionate, toward Camilla. Since his father's marriage to Camilla, William has been careful to include her, to show her kindness, to make clear that he accepts his father's choice. So this public preferencing of his wife over his stepmother creates an awkward dynamic that William must navigate carefully. The Spencer family, Diana's relatives, must be watching all of this with a certain grim satisfaction. For years, they watched as the woman they blamed for Diana's misery was gradually rehabilitated, accepted, even crowned. That must have been difficult to stomach. Now, seeing Catherine, the mother of Diana's grandchildren, the woman who in many ways has inherited Diana's position, if not her personality, being elevated above Camilla must feel like a form of cosmic justice. Diana's son is heir to the throne, Diana's daughter-in-law is the future queen, and Diana's grandchildren will reign long after everyone currently alive is gone. In the long arc of history, Diana's legacy is secure, while Camilla's position looks increasingly tenuous. Of course, we should acknowledge that some of the narrative around the situation comes from media interpretation and palace briefings that may serve various agendas. The British press has never been neutral when it comes to the royal family. Different newspapers champion different royals based on their readership and editorial slant. Some papers never forgave Camilla for her role in the Charles and Diana saga and would love nothing more than to see her sidelined. Other papers have tried to rehabilitate Camilla and present her as a dignified, hard-working Queen Consort who deserves respect. The papers that love Kate, and that's most of them, naturally emphasize stories that show her importance and centrality. But even accounting for media spin and selective reporting, the underlying pattern is undeniable. Charles is making strategic choices about how to position the monarchy for the future, and those choices favor Catherine over Camilla. This isn't subtle subtext that requires creative interpretation. This is evident in the public statements, the event positioning, the distribution of patronages and responsibilities, the language used in official communications, and a consistent pattern of who gets elevated and who gets overlooked. What makes this even more fascinating is thinking about how history will remember this moment. 50 or 100 years from now, when historians write about Charles's reign, what will they make of this dynamic? Will they see it as a wise and necessary prioritization of the monarchy's long-term interests over short-term personal loyalty? Will they view it as a betrayal of Camilla, the woman who stood by Charles through everything? Will they recognize it as a moment when the monarchy consciously chose to reinvent itself around younger, more relatable figures? Or will they see it as evidence of the institution's declining relevance, desperately trying to remain popular by sidelining controversial figures? My own sense is that historians will view this as a pragmatic decision born of necessity. Charles inherited a monarchy under strain. His mother's death created uncertainty about the institution's future. His own accession came with questions about his age, his controversial past, and his ability to command the respect Elizabeth had earned. His brother Andrew's scandals tainted the family. His son Harry's departure weakened the family's working roster and generated damaging publicity. In this context, elevating Catherine, the family's most popular and successful member, wasn't just smart politics. It was essential survival strategy. Camilla's supporters, and she does have some, argue that she's been treated unfairly. They point out that she's worked hard, taken on hundreds of engagements, championed important causes like literacy and domestic violence support, and conducted herself with dignity despite continued public hostility. They note that she asks for no sympathy, makes no excuses, and simply gets on with the job. They argue that constantly comparing her to Catherine or elevating Catherine at her expense is cruel and unnecessary. Both women can be valued. Both women can contribute. It doesn't need to be a competition. And they're right to a point. In an ideal world, the monarchy would be big enough for both women to shine, for both to be recognized and celebrated for their respective contributions. But the reality is that in an age of declining institutional support and intense media focus, the royal family can only sustain so many stars. The public's attention is finite. The media's interest is selective. And right now, that attention interest is overwhelmingly directed toward Catherine. The palace can either resist that reality and try to artificially boost Camilla to equivalent status, or they can accept it and make it work for them by building their communications and strategy around the figure the public actually wants to see. Charles has chosen the latter approach. What must this feel like for Camilla on a personal level? Here is a woman who spent years being the most vilified person in Britain, who couldn't appear in public without being heckled, who read newspaper columns calling her every cruel name imaginable, who knew that much of the country blamed her for the death of the Princess of Wales, who nevertheless persisted because of her love for Charles and her belief in their relationship. She endured all of that, survived it, gradually won a grudging acceptance, married the man she loved, became Queen Consort as even Queen Elizabeth finally acknowledged she should, and now, at the moment of her greatest triumph, she's being eclipsed by her husband's daughter-in-law. The psychological impact of this cannot be understated. Camilla is 76 years old. This was supposed to be her time. After decades of waiting, hiding, being the secret, being the scandal, being the villain, she was finally supposed to be able to step into the light, to be recognized, to have her position acknowledged and respected. Instead, she finds herself watching as the woman married to her stepson receives the admiration, the prominence, and yes, the affection from Charles that she might reasonably have expected would be hers. It must be painful beyond words. Some reports suggest that Camilla has retreated somewhat from public life as a result, taking on fewer engagements, spending more time in her private homes, putting distance between herself and the palace machinery that seems so focused on promoting Catherine. If true, this is understandable as a coping mechanism, but potentially damaging to her position. In the royal family, absence is dangerous. If you're not visible, you become forgettable. If you're not active, you seem irrelevant. The machine rolls on without you, and gradually, people stop noticing that you're not there anymore. For someone in Camilla's position, withdrawal might feel like self-preservation, but actually accelerates the very marginalization she's trying to cope with. Looking forward, where does this situation go? Several scenarios are possible. One is that the status quo continues, with Catherine gradually assuming more and more of the prominent roles and visible responsibilities, while Camilla remains as a supporting figure who does her duty but is never centered in the monarchy's narrative. In this scenario, by the time William becomes king and Catherine becomes Queen Consort, and almost certainly just called Queen, the transition will feel natural because Kate will have been the de facto First Lady of the royal family for years already. Camilla will presumably retire from public life at that point, having served her time and earned her rest. Another scenario is that Camilla decides she's had enough of being sidelined and demands a more prominent role, forcing a confrontation with Charles about how she's being treated. This seems less likely given what we know about Camilla's personality and her desire to avoid creating problems for Charles, but it's not impossible. If she did push back, Charles would face a difficult choice between his wife's happiness and what he believes is best for the monarchy. Based on the evidence so far, we can probably guess which way that choice would go, but it would create substantial personal and public tension. A third possibility is that something happens to change the dynamic entirely. A major scandal involving Catherine, though this seems unlikely given her track record. A significant shift in public opinion that suddenly makes Camilla more popular or Catherine less so, though current trends suggest the opposite is happening. A health crisis of Charles that makes immediate succession planning more urgent and brings William and Catherine even more to the forefront. Or simply the passage of time, with Charles's reign ending sooner than expected and the William and Catherine era beginning, at which point the whole question of Camilla's position becomes moot because she'll be the king's mother rather than the king's wife. What's certain is that we're witnessing a pivotal moment in the evolution of the British monarchy. This isn't just about palace politics or personal rivalries. This is about an institution trying to ensure its own survival by making hard choices about who represents its face to the world. Charles, to his credit, is being brutally pragmatic about this. He's not letting sentiment cloud his judgment. He recognizes that Catherine is the monarchy's greatest asset right now, and he's using that asset strategically, even though it means his own wife is somewhat diminished in the process. For those of us watching from outside, this drama is fascinating because it reveals the essential tension at the heart of modern monarchy. On one level, these are real people with real feelings, real relationships, real hurts and disappointments. Camilla's pain at being overshadowed is presumably quite real. Charles's conflict between personal loyalty and institutional duty is genuine. Catherine's discomfort at being positioned in competition with her husband's stepmother is probably sincere. On another level, though, These people are playing roles in an institutional structure that's bigger than any of them individually, a structure that will outlast all of them, and that shapes their actions according to its own logic and requirements. The British monarchy has survived as long as it has precisely because it's always been able to put institutional survival ahead of individual preference. When Edward VIII wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, the institution forced him to choose, and he abdicated rather than give her up. When Princess Margaret wanted to marry Peter Townsend, the institution said no, and eventually she complied. When Charles wanted to marry Camilla the first time, the institution deemed it unsuitable, so he married Diana instead, with tragic consequences. Now, decades later, Charles is himself the head of that institution, and he's making the same kind of cold calculation that was once made about him. The institution needs Catherine more than it needs Camilla's ego to be stroked. So Catherine gets elevated, and Camilla gets managed. Is this fair? Probably not. Is this kind? Definitely not. Is this necessary? Charles clearly believes so. And as king, his belief is what matters. The monarchy is not a democracy. The people within it don't get to vote on their roles or negotiate their positioning. The sovereign decides, and everyone else adjusts. Charles has decided that Catherine is his true heir, not in terms of succession, but in terms of who embodies what the monarchy needs to be. He's made that decision. He's implementing it through countless small and large choices, and the rest of the family, including his wife, must accept it. One can feel sympathy for Camilla, while also understanding Charles's reasoning. She's been dealt a difficult hand through much of her life, largely as a consequence of her own choices. Certainly. But the punishment has arguably exceeded the crime at this point. She's tried to make amends, tried to serve, tried to win over a hostile public. And just when she thought she'd finally succeeded, she discovers that it's not enough. She's acceptable, but she's not essential. She's tolerated, but she's not celebrated. She's the Queen Consort, but Catherine is the true queen in every way that matters to the modern world. The broader question this raises is what it means to be royal in the 21st century. The old model, where royalty-derived authority from bloodline and tradition alone, is clearly dying if not already dead. Modern royals must earn their position through service, through connecting with the public, through demonstrating that they add value to society. It's not enough to have been born into the right family or married into it. You must perform royalty in a way that resonates with contemporary values. Catherine does this brilliantly. She looks like a princess from a fairy tale, but talks about mental health and early childhood development. She's glamorous enough to grace the cover of magazines, but relatable enough that ordinary people see something of themselves in her. She's mastered performance of modern royalty. Camilla, through no real fault of her own, cannot give that same performance. Her background is aristocratic rather than relatable. Her story is about scandal and patience rather than fairy tale romance. Her causes, while worthy, are less emotionally resonant than Catherine's focus on children and families. She's doing her best, but she's playing a game where Catherine has every advantage. Age, appearance, backstory, public perception, media framing, all of it favors Kate. In this competition, Camilla never really stood a chance. And Charles, watching all of this play out, has made the only decision he believes he can make. He's chosen the future over the past. He's chosen the daughter-in-law over the wife. He's chosen pragmatism over sentiment. He's chosen Catherine. The palace is in shock, not because this decision was entirely unexpected, but because of how publicly and unambiguously Charles has made it. There's no deniability anymore, no room for interpretation. The hierarchy has been rewritten, and everyone knows it. As this saga continues to unfold, we'll see how Camilla responds, how Catherine handles her elevated position, how William navigates the complex family dynamics, and how the British public reacts to these internal power shifts. What's already clear, though, is that King Charles has placed an enormous bet on Catherine being the key to his monarchy's success and survival. He's investing all his political capital, all his strategic energy, all his hopes for the future in his daughter-in-law. She is his true heir in every way except the literal succession. She is the royal he believes can save the monarchy. She is the face he wants the world to see. And Camilla, the woman he loved enough to risk everything, the woman he finally married despite decades of opposition, must somehow accept that in the end, When it came to the choice between personal loyalty and institutional necessity, the institution won. It always does. That's how the monarchy has survived for 1,000 years. And if Charles has his way, by betting everything on Catherine, that's how it will survive for 1,000 more.